every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. Welcome to Anatomy of Crime. Today, we dissect the anatomy of a Cold War ghost. Imagine a landscape defined by harsh, unforgiving isolation. The city of Bergen, Norway, sits on the southwestern coast of the country, surrounded by deep, dark fjords and steep, imposing mountains. It is a place of stark and ancient beauty. But just outside the bustling city center lies a valley known to the local population as Isdal. The name literally translates to Ice Valley, but long before the chilling events of 1970, the valley bore a much darker, unofficial moniker, Death Valley. It earned this grim title due to its incredibly treacherous terrain, a place where unfortunate hikers occasionally lost their footing on the loose rocks, and where, historically, individuals retreated to end their own lives in absolute solitude. It is a shadowy, rocky ravine, almost always choked with heavy fog and cloaked in a pervasive, bone-chilling dampness. On November 29, 1970, a father and his two young daughters decided to take a Sunday afternoon hike through this unforgiving terrain. The weather was typical for late autumn in western Norway. It was bitterly cold, relentlessly gray, and threatening a heavy rain. As they navigated a particularly steep slope in the Ulriken mountain area, the established trail grew faint and difficult to follow. Suddenly, the air shifted. A strange, sharp odor cut abruptly through the natural scent of wet pine needles and decaying autumn leaves. One of the daughters, venturing slightly ahead of her father, stopped dead in her tracks. She pointed to a jagged cluster of rocks hidden off the main path. What she had stumbled upon would immediately launch one of the most perplexing and enduring true crime mysteries in European history. Nestled among the sharp rocks lay the badly burned body of a woman. The positioning of the corpse was instantly jarring to the first responders who arrived on the scene. She was lying flat on her back, her hands clenched into tight fists across her chest. Forensic pathologists refer to this as a pugilistic stance, a muscular contraction caused by exposure to extreme heat. But the fire that burned her was highly localized. It had not spread to the surrounding dry brush or the nearby pine trees. The flames had been concentrated almost entirely on her physical form. The front of her body and her face were incinerated beyond any hope of visual identification, while her back, pressed firmly against the freezing stones of the valley floor, remained largely untouched by the fire. The Bergen police immediately cordoned off the desolate area, recognizing instantly that this was no ordinary hiking accident. The crime scene was meticulously, almost theatrically staged. Various items were scattered around the burned woman in a spatial arrangement that defied immediate logical explanation. There was a half-empty bottle of St. Halvard liqueur, a very popular Norwegian brand at the time. Placed neatly nearby were two plastic water bottles. There was a silver spoon, swept completely clean of any manufacturer hallmarks or identifying stamps. Beside the body lay the fragile, charred remnants of what appeared to be a passport. Most chillingly scattered across the wet rocks were a dozen pink sleeping pills, some of them half-melted by the intense heat of the localized blaze. And as investigators carefully catalogued the scene, they noticed a terrifying detail. The identifying labels on the plastic bottles, just like the silversmith stamps on the spoon, had been deliberately and painstakingly removed. Every trace of origin had been erased. The autopsy results only served to deepen the enigma surrounding her death. The medical examiner determined a horrifying fact. The woman was alive while she was burning. Pathologists found significant amounts of soot deep in her lungs, proving definitively that she had inhaled heavy smoke from the fire that consumed her flesh. But the blood toxicology report revealed another contradictory layer to the mystery. Her blood contained a massive, lethal concentration of phenamol, a common brand name for the barbiturate phenobarbital. The forensic toxicologist estimated she had consumed anywhere from 50 to 70 of the pink pills found at the scene. This was a staggering quantity, a dose that would have rendered a normal human being deeply comatose, if not completely brain dead, long before the fire was even ignited. Yet, against all physiological logic, her lungs proved she was breathing when the flames erupted. Adding to the physical trauma, the medical examiner documented a severe, unexplained bruise on the right side of her neck. It could have been the result of a blunt force blow from an attacker, or perhaps a violent fall against the jagged rocks in her final drug-addled moments of consciousness. The official cause of death was formally listed as a combination of profound incapacitation by phenobarbital overdose and fatal poisoning by carbon monoxide from the fire. But the manner of her death remained completely ambiguous. Was this an elaborate, agonizingly painful suicide, or was it a meticulously staged murder designed by a professional to look like a self-inflicted end? 3 days after the grim discovery in Death Valley, a massive breakthrough occurred. Investigators acting on a tip located 2 heavy suitcases that had been left in the luggage lockers at the Bergen railway station. The rental time for the lockers had expired days earlier. When police forced open the suitcases, they desperately hoped to find a name, a home address, or a simple explanation for the charred woman lying in the city morgue. Instead, they found the tools of a professional phantom. The contents of the luggage were a forensic investigator's absolute nightmare. The suitcases were packed with high-quality, fashionable garments sourced from across Europe. But every single identifying label, every manufacturer's tag, and every care instruction had been systematically snipped, cut, or meticulously unpicked from the fabric seams. It was an act of deliberate, obsessive erasure that spoke to a highly disciplined mind. The suitcases contained no wallet, no credit cards, no driver's license, and no authentic passport. But they did contain a plethora of items designed for evasion. Detectives found a tube of eczema cream, but the prescribing doctor's name and the patient's name had been completely scraped off the paper label with a sharp blade. They found non-prescription eyeglasses with thick, clear lenses, carried purely to alter her facial structure. There was a collection of high-end, realistic wigs, varying widely in color, cut, and style. Hidden in the lining were several different European currencies, including Norwegian kroner, British pounds, Swiss francs, and West German marks. The most baffling item found buried in the luggage was a small, unassuming black notepad. When investigators opened it, they found pages filled with columns of cryptic codes. It was a matrix of letters and numbers, arranged in a seemingly random structural order. The Norwegian Domestic Intelligence Agency, the Police Security Service, was brought in to decipher the mysterious pad. They soon cracked the rudimentary code. It was not a highly sophisticated military cipher, but rather a personalized shorthand. It was a complex itinerary of dates, locations, and transportation methods. ML23 meant Madrid to Lyon on the 23rd. Other encrypted entries corresponded to flights and train journeys across Paris, Hamburg, Geneva, Oslo, Stavanger, and Trondheim. By matching the decoded itinerary with physical hotel registries across Europe, investigators began to trace the phantom's frantic footsteps. They discovered that she had traveled extensively and relentlessly throughout the year 1970, adopting a dizzying array of false identities. She was Genevieve Landseer in Oslo. She was Claudia Tielt in Bergen. She signed as Elizabeth Lienhauers in Trondheim and Fenella Lorck in Stavanger. For every single alias she employed, she possessed a corresponding forged passport to present to the hotel clerks. At hotel check-ins, she deliberately altered her persona. She required staff to speak to her in broken English, or fluent French, or heavily accented German. She changed her physical appearance constantly, utilizing the wigs and the non-prescription glasses found in her railway luggage. She exhibited extreme paranoia, frequently requesting room changes immediately after checking in. She routinely demanded rooms with very specific lines of sight, or adamantly refused rooms located on the ground floor. She was terrified of something, or she was actively conducting surveillance. Hotel staff across Norway recalled her as striking, elegant, and exceptionally cautious. She kept a wide berth from other guests and rarely engaged in casual conversation. She often claimed to be a traveling antiquities dealer. This was a highly convenient cover story, providing a logical excuse for her constant international movement, her lack of a fixed daily schedule, and her need to carry large amounts of varied cash. This deeply suspicious behavior immediately pointed investigators toward the shadowy world of international espionage. Norway, in 1970, was a critical, highly sensitive geographical chess piece in the Cold War. It shared a tense border with the Soviet Union in the far north, and boasted a massive, intricate western coastline that was absolutely vital for North Atlantic Treaty Organization naval operations and submarine tracking. During the exact time the Isdal woman was zigzagging across the country, the Norwegian military was conducting highly classified field tests of the new Penguin anti-ship missile system. These secret tests were occurring at military installations in the exact coastal cities she was visiting, including Stavanger, Trondheim, and Bergen. In one incredibly intriguing report, a high-ranking naval officer in Stavanger claimed to have seen a woman perfectly matching her description. She was standing dangerously near a restricted military testing zone, intently observing the naval maneuvers with a concentrated focus. Furthermore, several civilian witnesses reported seeing her engaged in tense, hushed conversations with unidentified men in various city centers. A shoe store employee in Stavanger distinctly remembered her purchasing a pair of rubber boots, the exact same blue rubber boots found abandoned near her body in the valley. The employee noted that she was accompanied by a man who smelled heavily of garlic and spoke an unidentifiable Eastern European language. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence pointing toward espionage, counterintelligence operations, or organized international crime, the Bergen police force officially closed the case within just a few weeks. They formally concluded that the Isdal woman had taken her own life. The official police narrative posited that she was a deeply paranoid individual, severely suffering from an undiagnosed mental illness. They claimed she traveled independently to a remote, freezing valley, ingested a massive, fatal overdose of barbiturates, set her own belongings on fire to destroy her identity, and then threw herself backward onto the flames as the drugs took hold. This highly improbable conclusion was met with immediate, widespread incredulity from the Norwegian public and independent forensic experts alike. Medical professionals argued vehemently that the physical logistics of the proposed suicide were nearly impossible to execute. Carbon monoxide poisoning and profound barbiturate overdose both induce rapid lethargy, loss of motor control, and unconsciousness. How could a dying, heavily drugged woman meticulously arrange the scene, swallow dozens of pills, and then ignite a localized, controlled fire around her own body while rapidly slipping into a deep coma? Furthermore, the missing clothing labels, the multiple forged passports, and the encrypted intelligence notebook were never adequately explained by the tragic suicide theory. For 46 years, the case lay dormant in the police archives, reduced to a bizarre, whispered footnote in true crime history. But in 2016, a team of Norwegian investigative journalists and forensic scientists convinced authorities to reopen the cold case. They intended to utilize advanced forensic technologies that the original detectives in 1970 could never have possibly imagined. While the woman's burned body had been buried in an unmarked grave decades ago, the police had retained a single, crucial piece of biological evidence: her jawbone. It had been carefully preserved in the subterranean forensic archives at the Haukeland University Hospital. This small piece of bone held the microscopic key to finally unmasking the Cold War ghost. Scientists successfully extracted tiny tissue samples from the bone marrow and the roots of her teeth to conduct advanced DNA profiling and isotopic analysis. The DNA confirmed she was of European descent, which was a broad but necessary starting point for the new investigation. But it was the highly specialized isotope analysis that provided a literal geographical map of her entire life. Isotope analysis is a brilliant process of examining the chemical signatures permanently locked within human tissue. As human beings grow, the water we drink and the food we consume leave distinct, measurable trace elements in our developing teeth and bones. These chemical elements vary wildly depending on the specific geological composition of the region where an individual lives. By analyzing the oxygen isotopes trapped in the enamel of her teeth, scientists could determine the specific chemical makeup of the groundwater she consumed during her early childhood. Strontium isotopes act as a geological fingerprint, reflecting the exact soil composition of her environment as her bones grew. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes provide intimate clues about her regional diet. The results generated by the laboratory were astonishingly precise and completely shattered her previous aliases. The chemical signatures did not match France, the country she most frequently claimed as her home, on several forged hotel registries. They did not match the United Kingdom, and they did not match Eastern Europe. The isotopes pointed directly to a very specific, localized region: the borderlands between Germany and France. Specifically, the data heavily indicated the area surrounding Nuremberg, Germany. The forensic analysis further determined that she was significantly older than she appeared to the hotel clerks, who described her as a woman in her late 20s. Based on the precise development and wear of her teeth, she was likely born around 1930. This specific age estimation places her childhood squarely in the middle of the Second World War in Germany. This vital historical context completely reframes the potential psychological profile of the Isdal woman. If she indeed grew up in Nuremberg during the 1930s and 40s, she survived some of the most horrific, devastating bombing campaigns and intense societal trauma in modern human history. Did the unimaginable trauma of the war create a fractured, deeply paranoid personality? Did she learn the complex arts of disguise, forgery, and deception out of pure necessity during the chaotic collapse of Europe? The isotope data also revealed another fascinating detail. The chemical markers shifted abruptly, indicating that she moved shortly before adolescence. She likely relocated westward toward the French border, a move that perfectly aligns with her later demonstrated fluency in the French language. Furthermore, analysis of her dental work revealed distinct techniques. She had several gold crowns, but the specific metallurgical composition and the style of the dental application were not typical of standard Western European dentistry at the time. The dental work strongly suggested she had spent time in Eastern Europe or the Middle East later in her life, adding yet another layer of geographical complexity to her phantom existence. Just days before her horrific death, a final chilling witness encounter occurred that completely contradicts the isolated suicide theory. A local Bergen man, 26 years old at the time, was hiking in the forested area near the city. He reported seeing a woman matching her exact physical description. But she was not alone, and she was not at peace. The hiker stated she was dressed elegantly, far too lightly for the rugged terrain, and her face was contorted in a mask of absolute terror. Walking a short distance behind her, matching her panicked pace, were two men wearing dark coats. The men looked distinctly foreign to the hiker, matching the earlier descriptions of Eastern European operatives. The hiker noted that as the woman passed him on the muddy trail, she opened her mouth as if to speak, as if to scream for his help, but she quickly glanced back at the two men trailing her, her eyes wide with fear, and she remained completely silent. She swallowed her words and continued walking toward the desolate valley. The hiker was so disturbed by the encounter that he immediately went to the Bergen police station to report the incident after the body was found. According to his later testimony, the desk officer told him to forget what he saw, stating the case would never be solved, and dismissed him without taking a formal written statement. The true identity of the Isdal woman remains entirely unknown. Despite global media coverage and international databases, no family has ever come forward to claim her remains. No government intelligence agency has ever declassified files acknowledging her employment or her mission. She is a woman who systematically and violently erased her own existence, leaving behind only the meticulously curated physical fragments of her false lives. Her story is a chilling testament to the terrifying lengths a human being can go to disappear, and the enduring, relentless power of modern forensic science to pull tiny fragments of truth from the cold ashes of the past. Today, we dissected the anatomy of a Cold War ghost. We explored a case fundamentally defined not by what physical evidence was found, but by what was so deliberately and obsessively taken away. The missing clothing tags, the vanished family names, the silent mathematically encrypted codes. The Isdal woman constructed an elaborate, impenetrable fortress of anonymity around herself, a fortress so thick that even her own brutal death could not completely breach it. And as she lay dying in that freezing, remote Norwegian valley, watching the flames consume the last physical evidence of her reality, she achieved her ultimate, tragic goal, becoming a permanent phantom whose silence speaks louder than any confession. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.